Hello, everyone. Welcome, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rahimeh Ramezany, and joining me is
Lusik Gasparyan.
awesome.
And my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you. Yes, my pronouns are she and her. Thank you both, all for joining us. Whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to put in the comments where you're coming in from. And this topic is really near and dear to my heart. I'm glad we're having a chance to talk about it because honestly, it's something I don't see talked about almost like
Mhm.
literally at all. And Lusik, you are the one, honestly, like if I see anyone talk about it, it's you, right? So, do you want to introduce the topic for us today?
Sure. And I think it's interesting that how we kind of came together to this topic.
Mm,
Um, so to start off, both of my parents were born in Iran.
mm.
On my mom's side, they were in Iran for 400 years, which
Like
was,
a moment.
I know it was crazy to find out, and my mom didn't even know. So it's been fun to find out more and more from my like maternal grandma
Mm,
and grandpa. Fortunately, both of them are alive to slowly be able to kind of piece some of the
mm,
stuff from them. Um, but yeah, they were both born in Iran, um, and they were Armenians both in Iran. My grandma and grandpa speak Farsi, but my mom does not,
mm,
and neither do her siblings. And she was very little when they went to Armenia. And myself and my siblings were both of not both all born in Armenia, and that's where she met my dad, who also was born in Iran,
mm,
um, in the same city as my mom actually. um, and on my dad's side, apparently my grandpa, who I never met, was
mm,
born in Ukraine, but
mm,
generationally, um, he has some Persian. I think um, he also, his side potentially survived the Armenian genocide by going to Iran, um, while my mom's side was in Iran. Um, So there's still pieces of information that we're trying to figure out from his side. And my paternal grandma, she spoke Farsi. And I remember her
mm.
give me the numbers only. That's as far as I knew for
Yeah.
Farsi. Um, but my dad doesn't speak any Farsi either.
Mm, mm, mm,
So, and right now, my dad's sister lives and her entire family lives in Iran.
mm, mm, mm.
So, um, with that in mind, if you were to ask my mom and my dad if they identify as Iranian, they would say no, we identify as Armenians.
Mm, mm,
But there was a point that like certain words that we would use, I would ask my grandma, what does that mean?
mm,
Um, and she would explain me the core of the word, and I realized these are Persian words. And certain foods that I would talk about with my Armenian friends, and they had no idea what those
yeah,
were.
yeah,
And I realized that we have such a incorporated culture that isn't just Armenian.
Mm, mm, mm.
And it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint which pieces of it are Armenian, which pieces of it are Persian, and some pieces of it are Russian because Armenia was under Soviet Union for so many years.
Mm,
So, with that in mind, I identify as Iranian Armenian
mm, mm.
because that's my culture.
Yeah.
Like at this point, my family has so many traditions that are part
Mm,
of it.
mm,
Um,
mm.
Foods that like some of my favorite foods, like kuku, which
Yeah, yeah.
is a Persian dish.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a big part of it, and I've never been to Iran.
Mm, mm,
So if you ask me how I identify, I'm Middle Eastern.
mm, mm.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the point of it.
Mm, mm, mm.
And we had a conversation, and then I learned that your background
Yeah.
is also on one side Iranian,
Mm, mm,
which
mm.
was neat to learn. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lusik, for all of that. And like, it's so funny because yeah, like because cultures talk to each other, they do engage. It's not like this is my border and you stay over there and I'm staying over here. I'll keep my food and spices and language and all of that, and you just keep your own. So yeah, my background is so I am. My mother is of mixed European background in the United States, so is white, and my father is Iranian. I have been to Iran twice to visit my family there. I do have immediate family there. And it's interesting because when you are multi-ethnic, and I say multi-ethnic though racially identify as white, and we're gonna get into the whole like, are Middle Easterners like white, are they not, why they're not, spoiler alert, they're not. Like, go to any airport, like tell TSA, hey, I'm a white person, you shouldn't be pulling me out for extra security. So I also don't speak Farsi, and going to Muslim spaces slash Iranian spaces, which are not mutually exclusive, of course, identities. The idea being like when I have very kind elderly Iranian ladies, Persian ladies come up to me and start speaking Farsi right away, and then I have to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak Farsi," and like a light in their eyes dies, right? Like, oh, okay. And there is a lot of like, do I count? Do I not count? As
Mm,
anyone who has multi-ethnic, multiracial identities, I know the folks that I've talked to with those sorts of identities, it's really interesting that no matter what your combinations are, like the feeling of lacking of belonging is very, very strong, like never enough of one thing.
yeah.
And I do feel like I've seen some of that reflected in immigrant communities or folks who came to a different country than their like home country when they were younger, of like, I'm not, like in this case, like say, we're in the United States, like I'm not like American per se, but when I go back to the home country, like I definitely feel other than, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's very interesting. And I have paler skin and like blue green hazel eyes, and actually my father has blue green eyes and my sister does, and then that's it. Like, and then my mother's father had the same color eyes, but like the idea of being like looking a certain way, having certain coloring means that you are Middle Eastern or not. I know there's a lot of Arabs who have very light hair and skin
Yeah.
and eyes as well, right? And so like it's very messy, and just bringing into the idea being like the Middle East in general was this like hub of trade, and different parts of the world coming, like many years, obviously, like very, very, very long time ago, right? Folks coming from China and from India and walking through, literally walking on horses and camels and by foot and so on, right? Like to go to Europe and to go to the Mediterranean areas and stuff like that. And so all of these cultures and foods and spices and stuff like that came through the Middle East. But then, of course, like people stopped and had babies along the way, right?
Mhm.
Um, I know that I've had a friend who is Lebanese talk about how the coloring of folks in Lebanon are very much affected by like the Crusades and folks from Europe coming and having children under certain circumstances with the folks in Lebanon, and so like the coloring of different people have been affected by like just the mixing of genetics. I'm not sure if I love that term, but I hope you all see and understand where I'm going with this. So just the idea of like having Middle Eastern identity, there's a sense of like, are you enough? Like, how much of a tie do you have to the Middle East to be Middle Eastern? Like by blood, how many times do you have to have gone there? How much time do you have to spend there? How do you need to be able to speak a certain language, whether it's Farsi or a dialect of Arabic? Of which, again, like I would just remind folks gently that depending on which country, Arab country, if we're just talking about Arab countries, there are completely different dialects, right? So if you speak Iraqi
Mhm.
Arabic, and if you speak Egyptian Arabic, and if you speak, I don't know, um, I don't know, a different kind of Arabic, like those are all different things. And I've talked to Arabs who speak these different versions of Arabic, and like I think Egyptian Arabic, because there's a lot of movies and media that different Arabic folks, Arab folks will watch, they'll understand Egyptian Arabic more likely versus, Iraqi Arabic folks will like literally not understand what they're saying. Right. So just having this messy identity and then bringing it to like when we are not in our quote unquote homeland anymore and being treated as, what are you? Especially like then there's the complicatedness of like you add the religious element. So I will very gently, very directly remind all folks that, not all folks who are Middle Eastern are Muslim, and not all Muslims are Middle Eastern. There are a lot of folks outside of the Middle East who are Muslim. Like people don't think of folks from different African countries as Muslim, like Indonesia and Malaysia. And there's a huge population of Muslims in India and in the, so many other countries, right? And also there are many people from the Middle East who are Christian and Jewish and not religious, don't ascribe to any particular religion at all. And all of those people have completely valid identities. But talking about like if you do add people who are Muslim, like for instance, like they wear the piece of fabric on their head if they're a Muslim woman, called hijab. Then there's the added element of like how are you being treated with Islamophobia? So it's very complicated, and there needs to be an understanding that nuance has to be held in this conversation. It can't be like, what are you? Are you black, brown, or white, and that's it? Like I can't possibly hold any more
Exactly.
nuance than that.
Exactly. And to add to that, for example, my sister and my brother both have fairer skin than
Mm,
me,
mm.
have different accents than me, have blue eyes, and what?
Siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, and blonder hair.
Mm, mm,
And um, according to um, what's been told, Armenians at some point
mm, mm,
look
mm,
more like that.
mm,
So, um, and they have straight hair versus my curly
mm,
hair. What my skin color looks like versus my brown
mm,
eyes,
mm, mm,
my accent.
mm,
So I think it's just that's the thing that's important to keep in mind, that there is no one version of Middle Eastern. And I gently pressed on this
yeah.
topic with a CEO of an inclusive
Mm,
um, organization on representation of Middle Eastern
mm,
pictures,
mm, mm,
because there were only um, darker skin hijab wearing
Mm.
Middle Easterns in all the pictures.
Mm. Mm.
And there was no one that looked like me, or no one that just
Mm.
didn't have a hijab.
Mm.
And as you pointed out, not everyone has the faith of Muslim,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm.
Um, so it's important, one, to hear the community when the community keeps telling you that you're not representing us.
Mm.
We
Mm.
don't all wear hijabs. Um, Two, it's important to understand that there is no one typical look
Mm.
of Middle Eastern.
Mm.
And we look all different ways. We can have fairer eyes, fairer
Mm.
hair. We can have darker features. We can have darker skin. We can have very curly hair. Um, I think the one thing that Middle Easterns do have in common is just our eyes tend
Yeah.
to, the shape of them. There's
Mm.
something
Mm.
about it that tends to be similar to each
Mm.
other.
Mm.
Um, but that's pretty much it.
Mm. Mm.
Um, but one thing that's important to point out is there is a difference between having those lighter features and being light passing or white
Yeah.
passing. Um,
Because you
and
also have your name, right? If you
exactly,
haven't
or
chosen or your parents haven't given you an anglicized name, like you're not
there's so
gonna
many
get any further.
complexities to
Yeah.
identity. Yes.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Mm.
are you visually Middle Eastern?
Mm. Mm.
Because
Mm.
America is so racist against Middle Easterns,
Yeah.
so incredibly racist. Um, let's remember 9/11. Let's remember two Muslim bans. And those Muslim bans didn't just go
Mm.
against like Muslim countries, they went against any countries that were thought to be Muslim,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm.
Because unfortunately, US is not great with geography. So,
Yeah.
and one of those countries that US put on the Muslim ban list was Iran.
Mm.
And
Mm.
during that time, I hid anything that had to do with my background as
Mm.
being part of
Mm.
Iranian. I told
Mm.
my parents to not in any way speak about being
Mm.
Iranian. My
Mm.
grandparents to not mention any word in
Mm.
Farsi.
Mm.
Like, that is how terrified we were. And it was it
Yeah.
was difficult. It was
Yeah.
really truly difficult because we're we were folks that were not born in this country, and we were afraid that our citizenships would be taken away
Mm.
because of the birthplace of my grandparents and the birthplace of my
Mm.
parents. Like, we
Yeah.
had to hide part of our identity.
Yeah.
um and it was a scary conversation to have with my parents
Yeah.
and explain to them why the world hates them. Well, why US hates them, hates their birthplace, why talking to my dad's sister right now is dangerous.
Yeah.
um and I, like, as someone that loves Arabic music, I didn't listen to any
Yeah.
word in Arabic
Mm,
for quite a few years because I was truly afraid that someone was going
mm,
to attack me.
mm,
Um, or any word in foreign language
mm,
because
mm.
I wasn't sure if people knew the difference between Arabic language or Armenian
Mm,
or
mm, mm.
Russian or any of the other languages that I speak.
They don't.
Exactly. Um, so, and you cannot imagine how many times I was randomly
Randomly.
chosen
Yeah, seriously.
for extra TSA love. Um,
That's a very nice way of putting it.
and let me tell you, my sister and I once traveled at the same time, literally
Mm,
after each other,
mm, mm.
both carrying soap in our luggage.
How dare you?
I,
The audacity.
she had liquid soap, and I had like a bar of soap.
Mm, mm, mm,
She went through with no problem with
mm,
her
mm,
liquid soap.
mm.
Mine, they busted out the chemical, um, the thing that you search with,
Yeah, yeah.
and fully investigated in my entire luggage.
Jeez.
Um, and that's just to show
Yeah,
some of the privilege that came with her having some of those lighter features. And we
yeah,
share the same last name.
yeah, yeah.
But I present visually more Middle Eastern and
Mm,
again have a thicker accent.
mm, mm.
Um,
I love when TSA for me, they always take my hand and they take this like swab on both of
yes,
my hands to like
yes,
what are you testing if I've like touched the materials to make a bomb recently? Like every single time they pull you aside in front of everyone, swab your hand, make you wait, and it's really embarrassing like cuz literally everyone else in the line is watching. So I try not to make eye contact with other people. I just try to like, okay, it'll just be over in a moment. Like, yeah.
yes. I almost got into a full on fight with TSA because
Mm.
of how they were treating my grandma, because they were screaming at her
Oh my
um,
god.
because she had jewelry on, and instead of gesturing for her to take the jewelry off, they were, yeah, like they thought with her not speaking English well, saying it louder
Ugh.
was a better process. And her being born in Iran
Mm.
obviously had,
Mm,
you know.
mm, mm, mm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's important to understand the history
Mm, mm, mm.
of Middle Easterns and how many of us were hidden for so many
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
like all the way until recently. Like,
And even
really?
still, like, there's so many people who, again, like, I know growing up, I held so much judgment of folks in my family who would, for work, change their names to an anglicized name.
Mhm.
And for me, being a younger person, being like, oh my gosh, I'm proud of who I am. I would never hide blah 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 blah, or like just a lot of judgment and honestly arrogance, and coming to the place of like, oh, this is the extreme discrimination that so many Muslims, Middle
Yeah.
Easterners, Iranians, Arabs have faced because of their name, and they're just trying to go to work so they can provide for their families. Like that's it. Like we're just trying to exist. And honestly fighting every single day the discrimination and not getting promoted or not getting projects, or folks being more likely to see fault in you, or if you do make a mistake, make it more about, oh, you are just like a bad employee, a bad person, instead of just being like a normal human being who makes mistakes, which everyone does. Like, just changing the name and using an anglicized name for your workplace, like that in exchange is so much easier when you already look different. If you speak with an accent as well, like accent's a great point, you're already going to face discrimination based off of your accent, and that's the case no matter where you're from. Like, if you are, like, again, speaking in the United States, if you're speaking with a non-American accent, like whatever that non-American accent is, you're going to be, well, except for like Australian and British, right? Like, again, like the white places of the
Yeah.
world, you're going to face so much discrimination. So, like, having to come for myself to having so much more humility for the fact, and also, like, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I very
Mhm.
much live in a very like protected bubble. There's absolutely Islamophobia and racism absolutely in this area. So I wouldn't want to pretend that. But even having said that, I still live in a very protected bubble. There's so many experiences of Muslims, Arabs, Iranians, the different intersections of those identities, of folks that I've heard experiences that they've had of discrimination, being yelled at on the street, being like treated horribly, horribly in their workplaces, on and on and on, that I haven't had. And part of that is where I live, and part of that is, um, I don't know, just like a different constellation of privileges. Again, like why I always mention, that I do have paler skin and, lighter eyes and stuff like that, because it absolutely does matter. Like, people see certain features, and because of certain beauty standards and, white privilege and stuff like that, it's not me, oh, I'm so amazing. No, not at all. It's white supremacy has favored people with these certain looks and people who don't have those certain looks. And so my intention with bringing it up is to acknowledge the privilege that I have, and other folks who have these sorts of features, and making it about the things that I have worked hard for. I have worked hard for those things, but there is very much a thick layer of privilege that is important to acknowledge, so that folks without that privilege, so one, like folks with the same privilege or similar privilege, we can like acknowledge the fact that we had it easier than others, and also for folks who don't have that privilege, to acknowledge that if you weren't able to accomplish or do the things that I was able to do, it's not because
Mhm.
I'm better than you or more skilled or anything like that. It's because like the white supremacy culture that we're in has actively stacked things in my favor, and against other folks. Again, though, like the hijab messes with things, right? Because a lot of white folks who are not Muslim or don't wear hijab or anything like that, um, they don't think of me as white. Whereas, like, when I'm around Middle Easterners, they do think of me as white. I was like walking around the first time I went to Iran. I was with my dad, who is full Iranian, and looks Iranian. And so I was, walking around the like a bazaar, like just shops and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
my dad told me that the people on the street thought I was like his German wife, which is like, ew, gross. Like, I don't know if anyone can relate to like people thinking that you, the daughter, are your father's like young wife. It's just like, it's so creepy and gross. So that's like a whole other like experience. But yeah, just like, yeah, and in the airport, yeah, like so many stories of folks don't think that I am related to my dad. They think I'm like his European wife, honestly. Like, I'd like to say friend, but no, it's not. They think we're married, which is
Yeah. Um, I personally, I had different experiences in the Bay Area. I had
mm,
worse experiences,
yeah.
and I came from LA. LA is
Mm,
definitely friendlier to Middle Easterns
mm,
because there's a bigger community. And coming to the Bay Area, San Francisco, there's less of us.
mm, mm,
And my accent just became
mm.
highlighted. And the questions of what are you became a bigger deal.
What are
And
you?
All the time, every time, the first questions, every time opening my mouth.
Mm, mm,
Um, so it became more dehumanizing,
mm,
and made me a bigger advocate actually.
mm, mm, mm,
Um, so I think just living in the living in LA,
mm,
I didn't realize how much easier it was
mm,
as opposed to in the Bay Area.
mm,
Of course,
mm.
depends in which part of the Bay Area.
Sure.
Just saying. And keeping in mind that it's still a privilege being in California.
Mm,
It's still a privilege
mm,
being in the Bay Area. But yeah, I I started definitely looking at things different way. I actually started loving my accent because it was so different.
mm, mm,
Um, the more the more people pointed it out, the more I wanted to rebel and just kind of keep it.
mm,
Um, but I think another thing that I want to talk about that you brought up is this whole idea of white, black, brown, and everything.
mm, mm, mm,
So it's important to point out that at some point, um, it was beneficial for when originally Middle Easterns came to settle, it was beneficial for them to be categorized as white because of
mhm,
all
mhm,
the
mhm,
racism and what benefits were extended to white people.
mhm,
The most recent census, there was a big movement for all Middle Easterns to participate
mm,
in the census because we wanted to get out of that
mm,
white category
mm,
and the other category and actually have Middle Eastern as
mm,
a full category as it should be
mm.
because it felt like there was no box. And being other is never the right choice,
Yeah, yeah.
right? It never feels right. It never feels right to write other or
Mm,
to check that box.
mm,
And white doesn't feel right because all those experiences that you and I talked about of racism and um, the way US treats Middle
mm,
Easterns, um, those are things that doesn't go along with
mm.
identifying as white.
Yeah.
So it just felt more appropriate to have the right category. And even though there was this huge push and more Middle Easterns came forward and
Mm, mm,
actually um, like actually wrote Middle
mm,
Easterns,
mm,
somehow census still came out and said Middle Easterns are
mm,
white.
mhm, mhm.
And when that came out, Middle Easterns were like, we could care less what census said.
Yeah.
We're not doing that because that doesn't feel right. That
Mhm,
that that doesn't describe our experiences.
mhm,
Of
mhm, mhm,
course, there are people that are interracial, and some people may identify as white, and each person has the right to identify whichever way they want.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
But for Middle Easterns that feel like Middle Eastern is the right term,
mm.
they don't want to put
Yeah.
white because that just doesn't feel right. So with that, I want to bring us to this whole conversation of Middle Eastern representation in DEI,
Mm, mm,
because all of this has to do with why there are so few
mm,
Middle Eastern representations in the DEI movement.
mm, mm.
Because if one, US doesn't let us categorize us,
Yeah.
like doesn't recognize us, um, and we're not able to have our own community,
Mm,
that and we can't have our own voices,
mm,
right? We
mm,
can't have voices to be represented,
mm,
and we don't feel comfortable having conversations like this,
mm, mm.
because for anything to happen, people like you and me and other people need to come forward and have these conversations for other people to understand what is
Yeah.
happening, what are the challenges the community is facing. But for that to happen, I need to first identify as Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
You need to identify as Middle Eastern, or at least like part Middle Eastern.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if US is not letting us do that, then how's that going to happen?
And even if it's not in like official census terms, like even in diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces like Middle Easterners, Iranian, Arab, Armenian, like those identities are never brought up when we think of, for instance,
No.
BIPOC, right? A lot of the times BIPOC is thought of as like Black folks, folks with African ancestry who are African, and then those who are of European background, either in the United States or still in Europe, and so on. And that's it. So, that on its own like leaves out a lot of different groups. Middle Easterners are not even included in BIPOC spaces, right? And considerations. And like it's really difficult because honestly, like for instance, when I first started speaking out about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that I really cared about, I was really like barely getting myself to post things or write certain things out in public because I was waiting for the discrimination and Islamophobic comments. And I have gotten a few of those, but thankfully not nearly as many as was I was expecting, honestly, and could be possible in time. And just the idea of like, when I do talk about Muslims or when I do talk about
Mhm.
Middle Eastern concerns, there's this pushback, like even from other BIPOC folks, not even like white people,
Yep.
where it's like, oh, this Arab country has this law that I don't like. So therefore you don't get to say anything on behalf of like helping Middle Easterners or Muslims or so on. Like, and especially as someone who I'm a US citizen. I was born and raised in the United States. Like, I've traveled to the Middle East a couple of times, but like for a couple of weeks, that's it of my life. Like, why on earth are you talking to me about something that's happening in another country that I'm not a citizen in? I have no control over. So, like, ethnically talking about like diasporas or people living in the United States, we're talking about specifically in California. We both have experiences living in California as a Middle Easterner. Like, that is a distinct experience talk except for, like, Saudi Arabia doesn't let, in the past, like, women drive. Like, what do you expect me to do with that?
So this is the way I'm going to kind of
Mm,
challenge this idea, is pushing it back on white supremacy culture,
mm,
because
mm,
white supremacy culture put it on other, both like global majorities and
mm,
other ethnic
mm,
communities, that there is
mm, mm.
scarcity of resources, that if one community is trying to have their challenges met, their goals met, their voices heard, another community can't have it at the same time.
Yep.
Um, and this makes me think of a post that I literally saw maybe 2 days ago, that if, for example, Black folks are bringing forward all the racism that's happening, that's the community is facing,
Mm,
that AAPI can't do it at the same time because it
mm,
takes away the attention from Black community,
mm,
which
mm,
is obviously not true because,
mm.
but white supremacy culture, that's the way that they put
Yeah.
it. That
It'd
we that
rather us fight each other.
exactly that, like,
Yeah.
that there is limited
Mm,
scarcity of
mm,
resources,
mm,
but
mm,
that's not it.
mm,
There
mm,
is no scarcity of resources. Like, there's no scarcity of attention. We
mm,
all
mm.
deserve human rights. We all deserve human rights.
Yeah.
So with that in mind,
Mm, mm,
we
mm.
shouldn't be pushing each other down. We
Mhm,
shouldn't be
mhm.
challenging each other's, like, pride, or like each other's rights. We shouldn't be doing that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Instead, we should be challenging this thing that's been holding us down. You, so instead of like saying, well, this is happening, what, like, why don't you do something about it? How about we challenge the system that's been holding us down?
Yeah, yeah.
And, like, if you think about it, white supremacy culture, like, literally is the root of so
Yeah,
much,
yeah.
so much. And I think it's better if we unite as opposed to, like, fight for
Scraps.
resources. Yes,
Honestly, yeah.
scraps.
Crumbs, yeah.
Yeah,
Honestly, like,
because
and the
we
idea being that you don't have, like, if you are not Middle Eastern, if you work in DEI or like are interested in social justice or equity spaces in any way, because I know some people are very interested and hesitate to identify with, like, I'm a DI practitioner or I do DI work because of some thought around you need a title or you need to have certain experience. And like, okay, so that's a whole other thing to unpack, but let's just say like you are interested, inclined towards social justice, equity work, inclusion work. Okay, great. The idea being of like you don't have to support the government of certain countries, any country, to support the people and the inclusion and the fairness and like the human rights, as you said so, wonderfully, Lusik, about the human rights of the people around the world, right? The people are not necessarily the government, as those of us in the United States can very recently attest to,
yeah,
right? Like I traveled internationally, like in 2016 era, if we remember the political status of the United States at that point, and having folks outside of the United States ask me about American politics and having certain ideas of what all Americans thought around American politics. And I had to be like, no, that's not. There's so many people who don't agree with what the government is happening. Just today, just before we came onto this call,
mhm,
I saw that Roe versus Wade was
mhm,
overturned, and that was by the Supreme Court. That is official American law. Are we saying that every single person in the United States, US citizen or not, absolutely agrees with that law? I think that we know the answer is no, right? So the idea being, again, so like if we're talking to an American audience, I'm American. I don't know if you identify as American. I personally feel like American is not like oh, you have to be able to trace your ancestors like a million years. Like for me, it's like if you've been in the United States 10 years or so, like you're American anyway. So I don't know, Lusik, I don't want to assume any way you do or don't identify. But just the idea being like, if I'm speaking to an American audience, you can probably assume, and honestly, wherever you stand on political spectrums, like for me, obviously, I am implying certain stances that I may have, right? But even if you are on the other side of the political spectrum, like there are laws that are passed that you don't agree with, right? That
mhm.
folks looking into the United States political system might be like, oh, you as an American automatically are a representation of your government. And we're like, no, I am not. No, I am not. I very much disagree.
Yeah.
So in the same way, looking at folks from Middle Eastern countries and cultures and being like, hey, the country that you are associated, your ethnic group is associated with, does that mean that you agree and support everything that's going on? And maybe they do and maybe they don't, but like that's an assumption that you are making that we need to absolutely break that assumption. If we want to have critical conversations around any country's political system and the laws that they're passing, those are completely valid conversations to have. But it is a completely separate conversation to talk about the human rights of the people from any part of the world.
I think that, so this is my philosophy
Mm,
is I don't use terms political correctness because I don't believe
mm-hmm,
the idea of political
mm,
correctness.
mm.
I believe human rights. Um, I don't talk around politics
Okay.
because to me, like, not in the way of I don't talk politics,
Yeah, yeah.
but what I mean is to me, DI has been tainted so much lately
Oh.
because DI has become just office jargon. It has
Mm. Like it's been
become
watered down.
it has been
Okay,
watered down. It has become
for sure.
less than what it's meant to be. To me, DEI is a movement.
Mm,
DEI is
mm,
human rights.
mm,
DEI is meant to be everything,
mm,
and
mm,
it's meant to seep through and protect us and lift us and be
mm,
part
mm,
of anything and everything.
mm,
And
mm,
it's not
mm.
meant to be one country, and it's meant to be global and this
Mm,
big, beautiful thing. And if it's not that, I don't want to be part of it.
mm, mm,
And I
mm.
feel like lately it has been watered down, it's been tainted
Yeah.
because corporations have gone hold of it and just made it less than,
Mm, mm,
so I think we need to not look at, well, what is this uh, person doing or that, but look at it as that movement,
mm, mm, mm,
looking at the bigger picture, and with that support the people that
mm,
are dedicated to that movement.
mm, mm,
And there is people that are doing so much for the movement,
mm,
right? They are actually like activists.
mm.
And to me, like, I love people that are activists
Yeah.
because to me, DEI is revolution. It's the thing that will continuously change policies and human rights
Mm,
and
mm, mm.
will bring back Roe versus Wade. Like, and to me, the DI practitioners that I follow are the
Mm,
people that are activists and will
mm,
be on the ground. And besides doing LinkedIn posts, actually do more than.
mm, mm, mhm, mhm.
Um, so I, I don't want to go into like my whole speech.
Yeah.
I just want to see, do we have any questions?
I don't know if I saw any questions per se. Some really amazing comments. Thank you so much to Sean. Walaikum salam. Thank you so much for your comments. If you're still here, if you see us responding, Paul, thank you so much for your comment. I really appreciate you. Emily, Renee, Cassandra, and let me see. Michael said, nice. Yeah. Celebrating Arab American Heritage Month. So I encourage you all to look on. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry, I am reading the comments on LinkedIn. The thing again, I just wanted to clarify really, gently but firmly about Arab American Heritage Month is that one, Arabs are not all Middle Eastern identities, so not all Middle Easterners are Arab, and then also um like if you're talking about, for instance, Muslims as well, like not all Muslims are Arab, not all Arabs are Muslims, so just being like, careful with how you identify. Like, I worry about the idea, and I've seen this criticism in other groups and other identity groups as well, is that the identities that get more, like the marginalized identities that get more support tend to be ones that can fall in line with areas of privilege. So, like for instance, white folks can be neurotypical, so I see a lot of, or sorry, neurodiverse. So, like the people who are neurodiverse who get a lot of traction tend to be white, right? When I first found out that I, have ADHD, I was looking for the BIPOC folks with ADHD or autism and so on. And I had a really hard time. And honestly, even then, I still have a hard time finding really any very strong voices. I'm sure they're out there. I'm looking for them. If you know anyone, please put them in the comments and I will follow them, but the vast majority of them are white. And the same thing with, with Arabs. Like Arabs obviously are not, as we've like been discussing, white. However, there are a lot of Arabs who are Christian. And Christianity is very much a privileged identity in the United States. So just making it about, if and Michael, I'm not saying that this is the intention of your comment as well, but just kind of like broadening that out to some folks can very much have this thought of like, oh, well, you have Arab American heritage, much so like why aren't you just happy with that? So one, like not all folks who are of Middle Eastern descent are Arab at all.
Mhm.
And then also the idea being that um you might be celebrating like Arab Christians who also like might be like pale skin, lighter eyes, like lighter hair. So like they're white passing in a lot of ways, especially if they don't have an accent, and then they're Christian. So that can come with a lot of privilege. And I don't want to ignore the folks who have darker skin, darker eyes, curly hair, like visibly show as, yeah, right. Yeah. Like that's amazing. Your hair is beautiful. Um, Having more Middle Eastern presenting identities, there are a lot of folks who have like who are black, who are Middle Eastern as well, which is something we're not talking about as well. So just having that idea for the nuance, and making sure that we're very attentive, like in white supremacy cultures, that we definitely can fall into, if we're not very careful, to like favoring white passing, or rewarding folks who can uh
Mm,
attach themselves to whiteness as much as possible.
mm.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Portia, thanks you so much for adding. She agrees with, oh, excuse me, they agree with um your comment around DEI being watered. Um, is there anything else you'd like to sum up? Maybe a call to action where people can find you, follow your voice, and learn from you going forward?
Yeah, maybe we can drop our LinkedIn profile
Mm,
information.
mm, mm,
But call for action, definitely find Middle Eastern
mm,
voices.
mm.
I did make few posts literally asking people to tag
Yeah.
some of their favorite Middle Eastern and Arab
Mm, mm,
voices. And so underneath it, you'll see some people that are tagged. So
mm, mm.
besides me, like there are other
Yeah.
people, and
Mm,
please like
mm,
follow
mm,
these
mm.
folks.
Yeah.
Like let's make this community bigger. Um, my goal is to actually have a full community that's known,
Mm, mm,
that like we can turn to, and speakers,
mm, mm.
because we need a representation in DEI work.
Yeah.
Like that's the topic. Like we need a
Yeah. Yeah.
representation in DEI work. um and if you see any of us posting on something that's affects our community, reshare it, repost it. Like Paul,
Mm,
for example. Oh, you're so great. You always share my posts. And I appreciate you because you've been an ally. Like, and
mm,
we just got in contact with each other with like very recently, but like you've been supporting the work that I've been doing.
Mm, mm,
Um, so yeah, even just like resharing helps because that message gets to other
mm,
people that you
mm.
wouldn't have, but with your reshares. Um, so these are some things, and also getting to know some of the holidays, right?
Yeah.
Getting to know what are the big Muslim holidays, getting to know, like, I talk about Armenian genocide, which
Mm,
is
mm.
such a big deal. And it's on April 24th. Just
Yeah.
a heads up,
Yeah.
1.5 million people were killed. Um, so
Yeah.
getting to know these big things are big, big deals in our communities,
Mm,
or
mm,
getting to know like what wars are currently going on in Middle East.
mm,
So much. There's always a war going on in Middle East. Like
mm, mm,
understanding what communities are being impacted, and we know that media only gives attention to European wars, right? We saw that with Ukraine and Russia,
mm, mm,
um, versus, by the way, Armenia and Azerbaijan have been going at it
mm,
for over a year.
mm. Fighting each
Azerbaijan with,
other?
well, Azerbaijan with Turkey's help has
Mm, mm.
been attacking Armenia since 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, and slaughtering Armenia. It's a continuation of the genocide, actually. And no one's talking about it because
Mm,
it's not a white war,
mm,
it's Middle
mm,
Eastern
mm,
war.
mm.
So yeah, pay attention to non-European wars.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah. And adding on also Middle Eastern joy, right? And celebrate, as you said, like holidays, things. And honestly, for me, it's not even like the sadness and the happiness, but just like letting people live, like the
Mm.
ordinary things. Um, all human beings, Middle Easterners very much included, are full human beings with full spectrums of emotion and experiences. And sometimes it is incredibly exhausting walking down the street, going to the grocery store, going to a Target to pick up a prescription, like, and feeling like I have to be this performative, happy person to kind of offset the danger, like things that like alarms that might be going off in people's heads if they see a hijabi walking down the street or walking through a Target or whatever. And I just want to exist. I literally just want to walk and do my life and not having to be thinking about what are all people looking at me thinking about Muslims or Middle Easterners or wherever they think I'm from, just based off of me existing. Right. So absolutely pay attention to the tragedies and the wars and the hardships because it absolutely is affecting people in the workplace, in their lives, like in your friendships and so on. Also look at the great joys, the holidays, like the wonderful things going on in people's lives, and also like literally just existing, how people talk to each other, how people get through their lives, what is meaningful to them. And I love for that reason, Lusik is similar to what you're saying, like following folks on social media who just talk about all of these different things. There are folks who just talk about discrimination and the wars and so on in the news. Those are awesome people to follow. There are people who just focus on joy and happiness and sharing their excitement and love of their culture. Those are also people who are amazing to talk to and they're to follow. And there are people who just talk about everything in between and like the quote unquote normal things in order to help educate and like just normalize their existence for folks who who aren't in community with people. And a lot of folks live in homogenous spaces. You don't have the option to make friends or to have coworkers that you have relationships with. And please don't like be tokenizing about it, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go and collect I'm gonna have like a list of people with a checkbox of like, okay, I have a black friend, okay, I have a Middle Eastern friend, okay, I have a white friend. Like, yeah, I know, right? Like, don't do that. That's not what I'm suggesting. Like, literally, like, I have a collection. Go catch them all. No, seriously, like, people I think are a little bit too literal. So it's not that point. Like, please don't tokenize people, but like, put yourself in community with other people. You're gonna have amazing food, by the way.
I was just going to say that if you find a Middle Eastern grocery store, go in.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, we all are so friendly. We
Mm,
will recommend
yeah.
stuff to buy. Our coffee is very strong. So if you love coffee, that's the
Yeah,
place to buy coffee.
yeah.
Ours coffees, all Middle Eastern
Mm,
coffee,
mm,
all our
mm,
variations.
mm.
By the way, if you ever find Edna, that's the coffee to buy.
Nice.
Just a heads up.
Yeah, yeah.
But all our coffees are strong. So just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like approaching people with sincerity, with respectful interest, like if people sense that you are approaching them in that way, most people would be more than happy to explain their culture or their coffee or the things that they like. It's when they feel like they're being tokenized, when they feel like you are trying to find some stereotypical box to fit them in, that's when things and problems come up, and you're gonna get like, I don't really want to talk to you vibes. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for coming to this live. Lusik, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your experience and being so incredibly vulnerable. I hope that the folks listening to this conversation understand that this kind of vulnerability is not like fun. This is not something that we're doing in some way that like it is a service that Lusik and myself are doing. And if you are someone who does not identify in this case as Middle Eastern, but anytime you see someone from a marginalized identity sharing vulnerably, it is with the expectation that you go and be more inclusive and be more equitable going forward for the other people in your life from these identity groups, right? We might not ever meet in person, and that's totally fine. But at some point, you will probably meet someone in this case, like who is Middle Eastern, who is Muslim, who is Armenian, who is Arab, who is whatever. And the like contract, if you will, of folks sharing their identities so openly is that the next time you and I and Lusik and anyone meets someone from these different identity groups, that we take the knowledge and act on it. This isn't
Yeah.
going to be, oh, I watched this LinkedIn live, this YouTube live, and therefore I am an ally and I don't have to do anything else from now on. No, 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 no. You have the knowledge now. Go forth and act on it. Thank you all
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.